Captain Zara Volkov had been having what she generously called a terrible day. First, the coffee machine on Deck 7 exploded, covering her favorite jumpsuit in synthetic caffeine sludge. Then, her navigation officer accidentally plotted a course through a radiation field that turned everyone's hair temporarily purple. And now she was standing in the cargo bay of her salvage ship, the Rusty Phoenix, staring down the business end of 7 very unfriendly alien weapons. "Well, this is just fantastic," Zara muttered, raising her hand slowly. "I go from purple hair to probable death in less than 12 hours. Must be some kind of record." The alien holding the largest weapon, a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a nightmare, clicked its mandibles menacingly. Its name was Commander Thex, though Zara didn't know that yet. What she did know was that his species, the Kythara, were notorious throughout this sector for their complete lack of humor and their tendency to shoot first and ask questions of corpses later. "Human vessel." Thex's voice buzzed through the universal translator, sounding like angry bees trapped in a metal can. "You have entered restricted Kythara space. Prepare to be boarded and processed." "Process?" Zara raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous. Does processing involve paperwork? Because I have to tell you, I'm terrible with forms." The other Kythara warriors exchanged glances. They weren't used to prisoners making jokes. Usually, by this point, most species were either cowering in terror or begging for their lives. This human seemed to be treating the situation like an inconvenience rather than imminent doom. Lieutenant Vex, Thex's second-in-command, leaned closer to his superior. "Commander, perhaps the human is suffering from shock? Their brain functions may be compromised. Or," Thex replied quietly, "they are simply stupid." Zara's enhanced hearing caught the exchange. "Oh, I can hear you, you know. These translator things work both ways. And for the record, I prefer creatively optimistic to stupid." The cargo bay of the Phoenix was cramped under the best circumstances. With 7 heavily armed Kythara warriors crowding into it, the space felt positively claustrophobic. The aliens moved with that peculiar insectoid grace that made Zara's skin crawl, their multiple limbs adjusting constantly for balance and positioning. "You will surrender your vessel," Thex announced, puffing out his thorax in what Zara assumed was a display of dominance. "Any resistance will result in immediate termination." "Termination," Zara repeated thoughtfully. "See, now that's where we have a problem. I'm kind of attached to being not terminated. Call it a character flaw." Behind the main group of warriors, a younger Kythara, named Scout, Crix was becoming increasingly nervous. This was his first boarding mission, and nothing was going according to the training simulations. The human should have surrendered by now. Instead, she was standing there cracking jokes like she was at a comedy club rather than facing down superior firepower. "Perhaps," Crix whispered to the warrior next to him, "we should just stun her and be done with it." The suggestion carried further than intended. Thex's compound eyes swiveled toward the scout with obvious displeasure. "Silence. We follow protocol." "Protocol," Zara said, nodding sagely. "I love protocol. Very civilized. Very predictable." She paused, her eyes scanning the arrangement of the warriors. "Question, though. In your protocol, does it mention anything about humans and our rather unusual relationship with sharp objects?" The question seemed to puzzle the aliens. Vex consulted his tactical display. "Humans are classified as a Class 7 species, technologically advanced but physically unremarkable. They possess no natural weapons or armor." "Physically unremarkable," Zara repeated, her tone turning slightly dangerous. "Well, that's just rude. What happened next would be debated in Kythara military academies for decades to come. Some would call it luck. Others would insist it was impossible. But those who were there, who witnessed it firsthand, would never forget the moment everything changed. Thex, growing impatient with the human's chatter, gestured sharply with his primary weapon. The movement was meant to be threatening, but the cramped quarters worked against him. His secondary arm knocked against Vex's equipment pack, which in turn bumped into Scout Crix, who stumbled backward into another warrior. In the chain reaction that followed, someone's grip loosened on their combat knife. The blade, a wicked-looking piece of Kythara engineering with a molecular edge sharp enough to cut through starship hull plating, went flying through the air in a perfect spinning arc. Time seemed to slow as the knife tumbled end over end toward Zara. The warriors watched in fascination, expecting the human duck, dodge, or at the very least flinch away from the lethal projectile. Instead, Zara smiled. Her hand moved with speed that defied the Kythara understanding of human physiology. Not only did she catch the knife, she caught it perfectly, snatching from the air by the handle as if she'd been expecting it all along. The blade stopped mere inches from her face, and she examined it with the casual interest of someone admiring a particularly nice flower. "Oh, this is lovely work," she said conversationally, testing the weight and balance. "Molecular edge, enhanced grip, perfect aerodynamics. You guys really know your knives." The cargo bay had gone completely silent. 7 Kythara warriors, trained from birth for combat, stood frozen in place. Their compound eyes were locked on the human who had just done something that should have been impossible. Scout Crix's legs gave out, and he sank to the floor with a soft thump. Vex stammered, his voice box crackling with static. Did she just catch Warrior Nim's combat blade? With her bare hand, another warrior whispered, while smiling, added a third. Zara twirled the knife casually between her fingers, a party trick she'd learned from her grandfather back on Earth. To the Kythara, it looked like she was manipulating a deadly weapon with supernatural ease. "The thing about humans," Zara continued, as if nothing unusual had happened, "is that we have this weird evolutionary quirk. See, our ancestors spent thousands of years throwing things at other things. Rocks, spears, knives, pretty much anything that wasn't nailed down. We got really, really good at it." She tossed the knife into the air, caught it behind her back, then flipped it over her shoulder and snatched it again without looking. The reflexes never really went away, along with some other interesting traits. Commander Thex was experiencing what humans might recognize as an existential crisis. According to every database, every tactical analysis, every intelligence report his species had on humans, this should not be happening. Humans were supposed to be soft, slow, and helpless without their technology. "This is impossible," he muttered. "Oh, this?" Zara gestured with a knife. "This is nothing. You should see what we can do with a properly balanced throwing axe. Or, better yet, don't. I imagine it would give you nightmares." The psychological effect was devastating. In less than 30 seconds, the entire dynamic of the boarding action had shifted. The Kythara, who had entered the cargo bay as confident predators, now found themselves facing something they didn't understand and couldn't categorize. "You know what the really fun part is?" Zara asked, her tone conversational but with an undercurrent of steel that made the aliens shift nervously. "I haven't even shown you the impressive stuff yet." She balanced the knife on one finger, spun it like a top, then caught it and held it up to examine the edge. "Your intelligence files probably list humans as Class 7, right? Technologically advanced, but physically unremarkable." The warriors exchanged glances. That was exactly what their files said. "Here's the thing about human classifications," Zara continued, her smile widening. "They're written by humans, for other humans, as warnings." She took a step forward, still playing with a knife. The 7 heavily armed warriors took a collective step back. "See, we don't classify ourselves as physically unremarkable because we're weak. We classify ourselves that way because we're trying to be polite. It's the same reason we put warning labels on everything and have safety protocols for activities that most species consider harmless." Another step forward, another step back from the aliens. "We're not protecting other species from our technology," Zara said softly. "We're protecting them from us." The knife disappeared from her hand, so quickly that none of the Kythara saw where it went. A split second later, it reappeared, buried 3 inches deep in the metal support beam, directly between Commander Thex and Lieutenant Vex. "Oops," Zara said with false innocence. "Slip." Scout Crix made a sound that the translator couldn't interpret, but which definitely conveyed terror. "Now, then," Zara continued, cracking her knuckles with deliberate menace, "I believe you mentioned something about boarding my ship, processing me. I have to say, I'm not really in the mood for either of those activities. She reached up and pulled a knife from the beam with casual ease, as if the metal had been made of butter rather than military-grade starship alloy. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to very politely back out my cargo bay, return to your ship, and pretend this conversation never happened. In exchange, I won't demonstrate any more of those unremarkable human physical capabilities. Commander Thex's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. You are one human against 7 trained warriors. I am one human, Zara agreed, but you're thinking about this all wrong. You're not facing one human. You're facing a member of the species that looked at the most hostile planet in our solar system and said, yeah, let's live there anyway. The species that invented warfare as a recreational activity. The species that domesticated wolves because we thought they'd make good pets. She paused for effect. The species that looked at the vast, empty, radiation-soaked vacuum of space and decided it looked like a nice place to build a summer home. The psychological warfare was working. The Kythara were a warrior species, but they were also pragmatic. They understood the difference between bravery and stupidity, and they were beginning to suspect that boarding a human vessel might fall into the latter category. One more thing, Zara added, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That knife trick? That was me being friendly. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Commander Thex slowly lowered his weapon. Warriors, he said quietly, withdraw to the ship. As the Kythara filed out of the cargo bay, Scout Crix lingered for a moment, staring at Zara with a mixture of terror and fascination. Human, he said hesitantly, that display of skill, is it typical for your species? Zara considered the question seriously. You know what, kid? That's not even close to typical. I'm actually kind of klutz. You should meet my sister Elena. She juggles chainsaws for fun. The young Kythara's legs gave out again. 0.3 standard galactic weeks later. Commander Thex sat in the strategic planning chamber of the Kythara High Command, facing a tribunal that looked about as friendly as a pack of starving razor wolves. The chamber itself was a testament to Kythara military efficiency, all sharp angles and polished metal surfaces that reflected the harsh overhead lighting in patterns that would give most species headaches. Explain to me again, Supreme Commander Zara said, her voice carrying the kind of cold fury that made seasoned warriors check their life insurance policies, how a single human made 7 of our elite boarding specialists retreat from what should have been a routine salvage interdiction. Thex's mandibles clicked nervously. He'd been dreading this conversation since the moment his ship had limped back to base with its tail metaphorically between its legs. Supreme Commander, the human displayed capabilities that were not present in our intelligence files. Capabilities, Zath repeated, her compound eyes glittering with barely contained rage. A human caught a knife. One knife. And this caused you to abort a mission? With respect, Supreme Commander, it was not simply catching the knife. It was the manner in which she caught it, the psychological warfare that followed, and the implications of what such abilities suggest about human combat potential. From the back of the chamber, Intelligence Director Quinn spoke up. His voice was smoother than Thex's, but there was an undercurrent of worry that even his professional composure couldn't hide. Our analysis of the combat footage has yielded some disturbing conclusions. Disturbing how? Zath demanded. Quinn activated a holographic display that showed Zara's knife-catching performance in slow motion. The human's reaction time was approximately 3 times faster than our projections indicated possible for their species. Her hand-eye coordination demonstrated precision that rivals our own warriors after decades of training, and the subsequent blade manipulation. He paused the display at the moment when Zara had the knife balanced on one finger. This level of dexterity suggests either extensive military training or an innate familiarity with edged weapons that implies a much more violent culture than our xenoanthropology department had assessed. Supreme Commander Zara studied the hologram with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that might kill her if she got it wrong. One human, one impressive display. This hardly constitutes a threat assessment revision for an entire species. Actually, Quinn continued reluctantly, it does. We've run this footage through our xenopsychology analysis programs, and the results are quite frankly terrifying. The chamber fell silent. Kythara didn't use the word terrifying lightly. Their species had conquered 12 star systems through careful planning, overwhelming force, and complete ruthlessness. The fact that their head of intelligence was admitting to fear sent ripples of unease through the assembled officers. "Explain," Zaf ordered. The human's behavior patterns during the encounter suggest that she was not displaying her maximum capabilities, but rather engaging in what our analysis indicates was play behavior. Play. Lieutenant Vex spoke up from his seat near the back. She threatened to demonstrate more of her abilities. That was clearly a combat threat. "No," Quinn corrected, pulling up additional data streams. Analysis of her biometrics during the encounter show no elevation in stress hormones, heart rate, or respiratory patterns. Her voice remained steady. Her movements were casual, and most telling of all, she was genuinely amused throughout the entire confrontation. He switched to a different display, showing comparative analysis charts. When we examine similar footage of other species under threat, we see immediate stress responses, fight or flight reactions, defensive posturing. The human showed none of these indicators. She was quite literally having fun. The implications hit the room like a physical blow. If the human had been enjoying herself while casually demonstrating impossible physical capabilities, what would she be capable of if she actually felt threatened? Scout Crix, who had been granted permission to attend the briefing as a direct witness, raised a tentative claw. "Intelligence Director, if I may add something?" "Proceed, Scout." When I asked the human if her display was typical for her species, she said she was actually clumsy compared to her sister, who apparently juggles chainsaws for recreational purposes. The silence that followed the statement was profound. Several officers could be heard quietly updating their personal evacuation plans. Supreme Commander Zaf turned to her tactical advisor. "General Hark, what is your assessment of human military capability based on this new information?" General Hark was old even by Kythara standards, his carapace scarred from decades of combat. He'd seen the rise and fall of civilizations, had personally led the conquest of the mineral worlds, and was widely considered the finest military mind in the Kythara Empire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "If a single human civilian can demonstrate such capabilities while treating the encounter as entertainment," he said slowly, "then we must assume that human military personnel are operating at a level far beyond our current threat assessments." He activated his own tactical display, showing troop deployment scenarios. "Based on Scout Crix's report about chainsaw juggling, I'm forced to conclude that humans may engage in combat training disguised as recreational activities. This suggests a culture so inherently militaristic that they've weaponized leisure time." The assessment was met with a collective shudder from the assembled officers. Furthermore, General Hart continued, the human's casual reference to her sister indicates that these capabilities are not unique to her personally, but may be common among human civilians. If their non-combatants possess such skills, their actual warriors must be. He trailed off, apparently unable to complete the thought. Intelligence Director Quinn brought up a new set of files. "I've taken the liberty of reviewing all our intelligence on human space activities. What we previously interpreted as reckless expansion now appears to be carefully calculated colonization by a species with complete confidence in their ability to handle any threats they might encounter. They're not exploring space," Lieutenant Vex said, sudden understanding dawning in his voice. "They're claiming it." "Worse than that," Quinn replied grimly. "According to our long-range scouts, humans have established colonies in systems we classified as uninhabitable. Radiation levels that would kill most species within hours, atmospheric conditions that would dissolve Kythara carapaces, gravity wells that should crush any organic life form." He paused to let this sink in. "They're not just surviving in these environments. They're thriving. One of our scouts reported observing humans engaging in competitive athletic activities on a world where the surface temperature averages 200 degrees above the boiling point of water." Supreme Commander Zaf felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's climate control. "What are you suggesting, Intelligence Director?" "I'm suggesting that we may have severely underestimated not just human physical capabilities, but their entire approach to survival and expansion. A species that treats lethal environments as recreational destinations and considers knife catching to be basic motor skills is operating by rules we don't understand. General Hark nodded grimly. And if we don't understand the rules, we can't predict their behavior, plan counters to their strategies, or assess their true military potential. From across the chamber, Commander Theck spoke up. There's something else. During the encounter, the human made several references that our xenolinguistics department flagged as significant, such as she mentioned that human classification systems are written by humans, for humans, as warnings. The implication being that they deliberately understate their capabilities when dealing with other species, a deception strategy, or a protective measure. She also stated that humans don't classify themselves as physically unremarkable because they're weak, but because they're trying to be polite. The chamber erupted in worried chittering as the implications became clear. If humans were deliberately downplaying their abilities in all their interactions with other species, then every piece of intelligence the Kythara had on them was potentially useless. Supreme Commander Zaf raised a claw for silence. Intelligence Director, I want a complete review of all human contact protocols. General Hark, suspend all operations in human-adjacent space until we have a better understanding of their true capabilities. Commander Thex, you'll lead a deep reconnaissance mission to observe human activities from a safe distance. Define safe distance, Thex asked nervously. Several star systems, Zaf replied without hesitation. Scout Crix cleared his throat apologetically. Supreme Commander, there may be another complication. What now? When the human told me about her sister who juggles chainsaws, she mentioned it was for fun. I've been thinking about this, and I realized something disturbing. If juggling chainsaws is recreational for humans, what do they consider to be actual weapons? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every officer in the chamber was suddenly imagining a species that considered chainsaws to be toys, and the implications were keeping several of them awake at night. General Hark slowly turned to his tactical display and began entering new parameters. I'm revising human threat assessment from Class 7 to Class 12. Class 12. Zatha's voice cracked slightly. That would put them in the same category as the devastator machines of the Hecate Nebula. Based on current evidence, that may be a conservative estimate. Intelligence Director Quinn pulled up the final piece of his analysis. There's one more thing. Our cultural assessment team reviewed the human statements about our species, looking at hostile environments, and deciding to live there anyway. They've concluded that humans may be what xenopsychology classifies as an apex adaptation species. Explain. Rather than evolving to fit specific environmental niches, they appear to have evolved the ability to adapt to any environment through technology, determination, and what can only be described as weaponized stubbornness. They don't conquer worlds by making them suitable for human life. They make human life suitable for any world. Supreme Commander Zaf felt the weight of command pressing down on her carapace. In the span of one briefing, her species had gone from planning routine expansion into human space to contemplating whether they should build defensive fortifications around their own territory. New directive, she announced. All human contact is to be classified as first contact diplomatic protocol. Full honors, maximum respect, no threatening gestures. If we encounter human vessels, we are to offer assistance, trade opportunities, or passage rights as appropriate. Are we surrendering our expansion into their territory? General Hark asked. We're recognizing that we may have mistaken a sleeping giant for a domestic pet. Until we understand what we're dealing with, the Kythara Empire will maintain polite distance from human space. Commander Thex raised a claw. And if they decide to expand into our territory? The Supreme Commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been dark humor. Then we'll offer them the best planets, and hope they find us useful enough to keep around. As the briefing disbanded and the officers filed out, Scout Crix lingered behind. Supreme Commander? What if the human was lying about her sister and the chainsaws? Zaf considered this for a moment. Scout, after what you witnessed, are you willing to bet the future of our species on that possibility? Crix thought about Zara's casual smile, the effortless way she caught and manipulated the combat knife, and the genuine amusement in her voice as she described human capabilities. No, Supreme Commander, I am not. Exactly. And that Scout cricks is why the Kythara Empire will survive long enough to figure out what we're really dealing with. Outside the command center, word was already spreading through the fleet. By morning, every Kythara vessel had standing orders: avoid human space, treat any human contact with maximum diplomatic courtesy, and under no circumstances should anyone throw anything sharp in the presence of a human. The age of Kythara expansion had just ended, replaced by what historians would later call the Great Diplomatic Caution, all because one human woman had smiled while catching a knife. And in the depths of space, Zara Volkov was completely unaware that she'd just reshaped galactic politics by being good at party tricks.